Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining us from different parts of the world today for this candid conversation. And the topic for today's conversation is significance of diversity, inclusivity, and equity in remote learning design. This webinar is brought to you by Round M Group Learning and Harbinger Interactive Learning. My name is Rahul, and I would be your host for today. So before we get started, let's take a quick look at what are the key takeaways. What is it at the end of this webinar we should expect? So firstly, we'll try and understand the significance of a diverse and inclusive design while implementing remote learning solutions. We'll look at some best practices for designing a learning modality, which is diverse and inclusive in nature and can be implemented within the remote learning solution. We'll also try to answer the question why a diverse and inclusive design is important for learner engagement. Why is it critical? And lastly, how to maintain a fine balance among equity, diversity, and inclusivity in your learning solutions. This will be approximately a 45 minutes webinar conversation. We have kept aside 10 minutes at the end of this webinar for an open discussion, Q&A kind of thing. But at any point of time, if you have any thoughts, questions, please feel free to share it with us in the chat window. I've been joined by a couple of my colleagues from Harbinger, Vikrant and Nisha, who will help us moderate and answer these questions as and when required. Now it's time to know our speakers. So our guest speaker for the day is Larry Bagrat from Round M Group Learning. Good morning, Larry. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. How are we doing today?
We're doing pretty well here. Thank you. Thank you for everybody attending. I've been working with Harbinger for a couple of years now on various projects. It's a great group over there. I've been in the training industry for more than 20 years. Before that, I was a college professor teaching creative writing. And before that, I was a book editor in New York City. And along the way, I've had a pretty extensive creative career with publishing books, making documentary films, running a theater company. So I always look for things that are creative and innovative when I can get those kind of projects. I've had my own company, Round M Group Learning, for about 15 years. And I've also worked inside some major organizations, either as a director of content strategy or learning strategy or senior instructional designer. I live in Denver, Colorado. This picture is a little off because it's almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit here today. We're having quite the heat wave here in August. But I'm from Denver and I left for about 20 years, and then I've come back when I got married and to raise 3 daughters. So that's pretty much me. How about you?
Thank you so much, Larry. And yeah, you're right. At this point of time in the year, this picture is off for Denver, but whenever I've had an opportunity to visit Denver, I've kind of seen this. So that's my image. That's the image in my mind for Denver. So, right. So thank you very much, Larry. In fact, we have enjoyed, our teams have enjoyed working with you, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. I think we are all excited and looking forward to hear your views as you have seen the e-learning industry, get conceptualized right from the beginning and then evolving over a period of time. So thank you once again, and looking forward to this conversation. So now moving on to the second speaker for the day, that's me. My name is Rahul Singh. I work for Harbinger Interactive Learning. A little bit about myself. I'm primarily an enthusiast and passionate about digital learning. What I believe in is I believe in helping business leaders, L&D stakeholders solve real-time business challenges through intervention of learning programs. So that's me. And then Harbinger Interactive Learning. So Harbinger Interactive Learning, a little bit about the organization in terms of who we are, what we do. We've been in the business for more than 3 decades now, about 30 years of extensive experience in delivering innovative learning solutions for various industry verticals. And we primarily specialize in helping organizations migrate their classroom-based trainings and in-person training programs into virtual and digital formats. And I'll just take a pause here, and any guesses which part of the world this picture is from? Right, so yeah, this is, so Harbinger Interactive Learning is based out of a city called Pune on the west coast of India. This is the approach road to Pune when you're, driving from Mumbai, one of the major airports. Okay, right, so let's move ahead now. Give me a moment. Yeah, all right. So now before we start this conversation with Larry, Larry, I wanted to request the audience to take a look at this new commercial from Nike. Well, a lot of us might have already seen it. It is being said that the ad agency, the advertisement agency who worked on this, reportedly went through the footage from around about 4,000 odd different sporting events and came up with this, interesting video. The thing which fascinates me the most is how seamlessly they have kind of demonstrated the diversity and inclusivity piece in this piece of work. So just allow me a moment. I'll be flipping my screen. So you'll see a blank screen for a moment, and then you'll be able to see the video at your end. It's like 1 minute, 10 seconds, 15 seconds odd. So let's run that for you, and let's hopefully you'll enjoy this video. Right, it should be coming up on your screens now. Okay, here it is.
We're never alone. And that is our strength. Because when we're doubted, we'll play as one. When we're held back, we'll go farther and harder. If we're not taken seriously, we'll prove that wrong. And if we don't fit the sport, we'll change the sport. We know things won't always go our way.
And the world's sporting events are postponed or cancelled.
But whatever it is, we'll find a way. And when things aren't fair, we'll come together for change.
We have a responsibility
to make this world a better place.
And no matter how bad it gets, we will always come back stronger. Because nothing can stop what we can do together.
Right, thank you for watching that video. And just allow me a moment to go back to the presentation screen. I hope you liked that video and the work. Okay, so now coming back to our presentation here. All right, so now is the time for us to take an audience poll. And the audience poll, the poll should be coming up on your screens anytime now. I'll run that poll for you. Yeah, so the question is, do you agree that it is necessary that your learning solution captures diversity and the inclusivity piece? How important is it? So let me run the poll. It should be coming up on our screens now. I'll repeat the question. Do you agree that it is necessary that your learning solution captures diversity and is inclusive in nature? We have three options. It's a single choice answer. So you can select yes, no, or not sure. Hopefully we would have got the polls on our screen now. Right. Thank you very much for the participation. We see responses coming in. In fact, 63% people have voted till now. We'll keep it open for another 5 to 10 seconds, say. Okay, now 82% people have voted. Thank you so much for this active participation. We'll end the poll now. And let me see if I can share the results. Yes, I have an option. So 93% of our audience today feels that yes, it is necessary that the learning solution captures diversity and is inclusive in nature. No one has voted for no. There are 7% people who are not sure. And maybe by the end of this webinar, we might be able to help those friends of ours who are not sure to take a decision either ways. So once again, thank you very much for your active participation in this. We will now move ahead with our conversation. So, all right, so now let's take a deep dive into why continuously, this diversity and inclusivity is becoming an integral part of our systems. And we promised you that we'll talk about the significance of diversity and inclusivity in remote learning design. So this section, we'll be talking about those particular things, and we'll be, asking Larry a few questions around his experience in these areas. Before Larry, we come to pick your brains there. For a moment, I just wanted to launch the screen here and allow, request our audience to openly share their comments in the chat box, chat window. So this is a screenshot from a animation video that we have developed using a tool called Beyond. Now, if we look at this, and if this was part of a learning program or a learning modality, could we do, as learning designers, could we do something differently to make this more inclusive in nature? And just feel free to type in your thoughts in the chat window. If there's anything that comes to your mind that we could have, done differently. And I'll, yes, so I think the first three responses that we have got is the gender inequality. Absolutely. In fact, 4 to 5 people have said gender equality. There isn't a female in this scene. Okay. One response is show people of different ages. Well, that's an interesting point, Larry. I never realized that all these 4 folks, or more or less, would you agree? They are from the same age group, kind of?
By the way, ageism is the leading bias, unconscious bias found in the workplace. So.
Right, that's a valid point. And so show someone with a disability, maybe someone sitting in a wheelchair. Absolutely, right. And thank you very much for sharing these thoughts. I'll tell you one of the points that was made to us by a person who was reviewing this was, we are working in remote scenarios now, and there's a major shift towards remote working that is happening across the globe. So what if that white screen that you have in this video animation, if that was actually, that could actually show different windows of people attending meetings through Zoom, through remote working. So a blend of, in the office working environment, remote working environment, so that would make it more inclusive. Yeah, there's one more comment around, different geographic distribution. So thank you very much. It seems like there's a lot that can be done with this screen. So thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. Right, Larry, now it's time for us to hear from you in terms of why do you feel, or why is it that diversity and inclusivity is so significant? And we want to know your thoughts in two aspects. One is the business side of it. As you said, that it's no more a soft skill need, but it's a business need. So we would like to understand what is the business need that is driving this. Firstly, we'd like to talk about that hear about that from you. And then we would come to the design aspect, if that sounds okay to you.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure everybody on this call has seen or heard about all the social justice protests here in America after the killing of George Floyd and many other African Americans. It's been amazing to see the sort of wake up by corporations. Most of the major corporations have taken out ads or ran ads that said, where Black Lives Matter, but on the other hand, a lot of these corporations aren't really doing D&I. They still treat people of color differently than they treat, in this case, white people. They have very few people of color in leadership roles. They have very few women in leadership roles. So there's still this kind of split between the sentiment and the reality. And in a way, that's sort of what describes the difference between diversity and inclusiveness. Diversity is really a matter of numbers, how many women are in leadership roles, et cetera. But inclusiveness really has to do with creating a civil and respectful workplace where everyone's welcomed, where new ideas are part of discussions, where we hear from everybody, where we learn from other people. So it's interesting. From a pure business point of view, though, there's been scores and scores of studies about the effect of D&I on businesses. For one thing, there's been studies that it reduces employee turnover, and not just with people of color. I mean, if an organization is heavily white male in leadership role, there's a time where a lot of people feel like they can't get promoted or move up in that area, and they'll leave. Enhanced productivity. When people don't have to worry about prejudice, being stereotyped, being disrespected, being in some cases legally discriminated against, well, clearly it's going to enhance productivity because everyone has a more positive attitude coming to work. There's more collaboration, and people who are happy tend to be more productive at work. The whole idea of creating a safe environment for all people at work. As far as in line with innovation, there's a lot of safety in being part of hanging out with a group that sort of looks and acts like we do. But on the other hand, that limits the kind of ideas and experiences that can be brought to bear. And so if you have a more inclusive work culture, chances are you're going to be getting different kinds of ideas from different people who have different experience, who have different backgrounds, education, and that's pretty much key to innovation. Try something new. As I said earlier, there's a lot of companies that are now trying to work towards a civil and respectful workplace. There's a lot of training out there now about how to get there, by the way. So again, if people see other people like themselves at work, if people see that other people like them are respected and promoted and get good equal salaries and things of that nature, clearly it's going to make the safe environment I described earlier. And finally, it's interesting, but there's been a lot of studies done that says diversity and inclusiveness has a real positive impact on the bottom line. For instance, recently, McKinsey, the big consulting firm here in America, found that businesses that prioritized that prioritize diversity and inclusiveness actually outperformed their peers who do not by 35%. So that's a pretty telling statistics. So that's sort of where I'm at on this slide, Raul.
Right, Larry, and thank you very much. I think irrespective of the size and the nature of your business, every organization would want to score on these 5 points or attributes that you mentioned, and these are all critical. And there is, fact and data behind all this that's been proven. So I think they're very critical in terms of business needs rather than soft skills. So this kind of reiterates that, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on this. So now we kind of spoke about from the business side of it. So the business need is definitely there, which most of us tend to agree. Now coming to the learning design perspective. So for example, if I'm a learning practitioner or in the learning and development role, and I'm responsible for designing learning solutions and implementing D&I through that, what are some of the best practices based on your experience that you would like to share with the community today?
First of all, I want to respond to a chat that sort of said, we're not really walking the walk here because we're not having a closed caption system for people who are hearing impaired. I agree. I wish Zoom had that capability. There are other web conferencing services like Google Meetup that are much better in terms of accommodating accessibility issues. So my apologies. But in any event, a lot of people, as I said earlier, they think if they throw up a lot of pictures of people from different ethnic backgrounds, of different color, things of that nature, that they're, that they can handle it. But they don't, but that alone is not really including the inclusiveness part. One thing that I've noticed, having developed a lot of courses on unconscious bias and things of this nature, is that the people creating and producing training really have to look at their own unconscious biases. They have to be really self-aware of sort of instant judgments that they may make when it comes to choice of images, choice of videos, choice of diction and idioms, choice of being culturally sensitive when it comes to certain activities or presentations. So it's beyond just sort of the kind of ad viewpoint that, if we show diversity, then we're doing a good job on it. And secondly, I always say that put yourself in the shoes of the learner. We don't always do that. I wrote an article some years ago called Pity the Poor Learner, because from a learning point of view, there's a lot of training and learning experience out there that is boring, not practical, not very relevant, and also that people may not find their group or other groups that they belong to within the learning. It's just like a TV or movie show. Generally you're going to watch something if on some level you identify with the protagonist, or you see somebody on screen who looks like you or belongs to a group that you belong to. So if I'm a learner and I see a piece of learning that's sort of like the boardroom role that you showed us earlier, and I don't see somebody who's older like me, or potentially a person with disabilities, or somebody who's maybe more casually dressed, I'll just sort of tune out a little bit and I won't be as engaged. I think the other point is, training does not happen in a vacuum. Training, the experience of people's experience in training will emanate out into the community. So people go home and they say, yeah, I had to do this training, but here's the reasons I didn't like it. One of which was it was all a bunch of white people, or it was all a bunch of young people, or it was only a bunch of people have this kind of job, this kind of thing. What happens then? Chances are there's going to be the organization responsible for that will have its reputation potentially tarnished. It may have trouble retaining or even recruiting new people, because I wouldn't want to work at a place if this is kind of the message they're giving out to the world. So things of that nature. And then the other thing that I think is happening, and I think it's obviously a good thing, is that a lot of L&D departments, learning and development departments, are now moving from the idea of being a training organization to being a learning organization. And by that, I mean that they're looking at learners more individually and more holistically, that there's more customized or prescriptive learning, there's more continuous learning, there's more respect for different learning styles, there's a lot more thought given to accessibility issues, and there's a lot more different ways that people learn. In some instances, it might be mentoring, it might be on the job, it may be a virtual workshop, it may obviously be e-learning or micro-learning. So I think as people start looking at themselves and understanding where things like unconscious or implicit bias are happening at the workplace, I think dealing with that and managing that and helping your learners manage that is going to make this movement from training to learning more feasible and easier. And then finally, we all stereotype, and we all have prejudices, but of course the question is, what are we going to do about it? So again, you have to be very careful. Like for instance, we'll talk about stock image libraries in a moment, but if I have a certain prejudice against skin color, even within a country like India or in America, if I have a prejudice or an instant bias against darker skin, so I only pick images of lighter skin, let's say lighter skin African Americans or lighter skin Indians or Asian people who look more Western, things of this nature, then I'm not really doing a service. All that I'm largely doing is expressing my own biases. So again, just as we have to do with any kind of unconscious bias, it's really important to take stock of our own stereotypes, be aware of them, and potentially, avoid them when we realize. And the other thing about stereotype is almost all stereotypes you make a judgment based on a group, but you're making that judgment about an individual. All people from India do this when they're trying to make up their mind, or all people of India like spicy food or things of that nature. Well, that's not fair, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of stereotypes about Americans. All Americans talk loud. All Americans, only value money, things of this nature. So these are practices that don't necessarily happen instantly, but I think they're really, really important if we're going to really be true to the goal of inclusive training and learning experience. Ro?
Thank you so much, Larry, for sharing these thoughts. And these are some of the best practices that Larry has shared based on his experience. And of course, we are not saying that we are limited to this. It could be more. If I had to pick my personal favorites, I would say community as a stakeholder. That's number one for me. And then transformation from culture of training to culture of learning. Because what's happening is through this, we are focusing on the learner, Larry. And the learner, the values that we instill in the learners today, these learners eventually go and create the community or, add value to the community. And, that's how things start, moving out of the office environments or, the corporate environments and reach the larger community. So thank you very much. And of course, there's a lot to be done in this area. And it will take some time before, people are able to say that, yes, we can score 100% in this area. But yes, there's always a start. We have to start the journey. Right, now Larry, I understand you wanted to run a video on mute without audio so that you can share a story about this video. Is that okay?
Yeah, you have the video, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that I work for this company called Syntrio, Sytrio. They have content libraries, a lot of e-learning and such that they obviously sell licenses for. And in the wake of Black Lives Matters and a lot of this police murder that was happening here, we put out a free sort of public service announcement about unfair bias. And Raul, if you just will go ahead and run this. This talks about a lot of the points that I was talking about earlier, about fairness in the workplace, about equality in the workplace, and obviously not just in the workplace, but in society as a whole. There's part of me that's very, very sad that it's taken all these murders and the realization of all the systemic racism for people to wake up a little bit and take action and to educate themselves. But hopefully we're at that moment, and hopefully it's a moment that will be sustained and not be just sort of what people did this summer, but then, they go back to their old stereotypes. They go back to their own in-group mentality of things of that nature. So this little video, which runs roughly a minute and a half or so, gives you steps that you can take, things of that nature. So again, I think there is a movement already underfoot to improve the learning and training world and to really show it much more as how various much more fairly in terms of demographics across society, regardless of where the country is. So yeah, we see this quote a lot these days. So I just wanted to share that. As I said, it's at Syntrio.com. If you want, I can put the company's name in the chat just in case you want to watch it. That's sort of what I wanted to share there. If we can move on.
Sure, Larry. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that was an interesting one. Thank you so much for bringing that up in this conversation and giving us a glimpse of it. Right. Okay. So moving ahead, since we are talking about unconscious bias and prejudice, that's one of the important things which organizations are trying to address. Let me tell you a little short story about this particular experience. So this visual was created by Harbinger Interactive Learning's visual design team. It's part of an e-learning solution, a bigger e-learning program. Within the context of that e-learning, this female character is supposedly from the LGBT community. And then, so what we have done is we have ensured that there's no unconscious bias that people can take out of this particular visual because it's a normal female. There's nothing specific that you have to do that, to emphasize that this particular person is from a particular community or represents a particular community. So there are things that we should do to ensure that, diversity, inclusivity, equity are getting addressed. And at the same time, I think this experience told us that, there are some things which you shouldn't do to ensure that, your learning solutions are compliant and more inclusive in nature. So with that, let's take a moment and run the second poll for today. So I'll be bringing up that poll on our computer screens in a short while. Okay, you should have it now. It says, will a learning program that captures diversity and inclusivity aspects in design eventually lead to engaged learners? So this is around the learner engagement piece. Poll is up on the screen. I hope everyone should have got it. Yes, we see responses coming in. Thank you for participating in this. Right, around about 65% people have voted till now. Thank you. We will, probably in the next 5 to 10 seconds, we'll share the results here. Okay, so we'll end polling and we'll share the results here. Right, so thank you for participating in this. It seems like, yes, there's clear indication that yes, learner engagement, to ensure a higher level of learner engagement, we need to capture these components, diversity and inclusivity in our learning solutions. 86% people feel yes about this. There's 14% people who feel not sure about this, right? So let's see if, this conversation that we are gonna have ahead with Larry and ask Larry a few questions, will that help us bring to a decision point either ways? Okay, Larry, so we'll be moving.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, right. So moving ahead in the conversation, what we basically wanted to understand from you is why is it that diversity and inclusivity is important for learner engagement? I mean, any thoughts based on your experiences that you can share?
Sure. As I said earlier, if I can identify with something either on the screen or on a slide or in a scenario that's familiar to me, chances are I'll be more engaged. I did a little totally unscientific research recently because I've always been irritated by stock image libraries, Shutterstock, iStock, Getty images, things of that nature, about how unfair they were. So often what happens is, as an instructional designer, if you're looking for images, you're overwhelmed by the number of white people, and you are challenged to find people of color or people with disabilities. If you look to the right of the screen, you can see that on the top right, there's a woman probably of Indian descent or South Asian descent. There's an African-American person. There's a woman who may be Chinese or Chinese-American or Malaysian or something on the bottom right. So when you do find an image of somebody who's a person of color, they're used to death. Like the gentleman in the middle there who's smiling, the African-American gentleman, I see him in tons of training. I see him in advertisements, in magazines and on television. I see it on websites. So it's been a real issue. So basically what I did is for the search criteria, I used serious business person. And then I changed it. I did a search for white. I did a search for Black or African-American. I did a search for people with disabilities. I did a search for Latinx or Latino or Hispanic business people. And then I did a search for American Indians. And as you can see in the column on the far left, and this is just for the US, so the US population is 73% white, almost 13% African-American. 1 in 5 Americans is a person with disabilities. People probably don't realize that because we don't see them very much in the media. Approaching 20% of the country is now Latinx, and roughly 1% is American Indian. But if you look at what happens, let's say Library A, the number of white people were 95%, as opposed to what it should have been, closer to 73%. The African Americans were only shown to be 4 or 5%. People with disabilities, even though they're 1 in 5 Americans, they were only 0.2% of images. And as you can see, this goes even further down. Hispanics, Latinos, Latinx are almost 20% and growing in America, but their representation is really bad. So, and then if you look at columns B and C, these aren't much better. you know, in stock library C, the number of white people were 97%. Okay. So, you know, what I'm saying is, at a certain level, we're not to use the old tired sports metaphor, you know, the playing field is not even. So what does this mean? It means that, you know, we have to expand our look for images. We have to expand our look for stock video. We really have to consider, you know, where we could go to better represent it. Now, for instance, if you go to the web and search people of color photos, you'll find a lot of sites. Many of them have free photos that aren't, you know, they're not the tired ones you see over and over again. So, you know, places like Pixel or Pixabay, there's a lot of different sites that have better demographics in terms of fairness. So this is just one example of where we can take the initiative to understand what the system per se, or the institution per se, in this case represented by stock image libraries, you know, what they want, how the world they want us to see versus the world that we really want to represent and project.
Right. And Larry, thank you very much for sharing this research of yours with all of us. I never thought it this way. I felt that, you know, this stock image library, there are these multiple options, and then we can get these images and all, but this is one starting point. So in terms of the learner engagement, they start connecting with the learning solution, and they want to see someone like them, probably like we would expect in a movie kind of thing, wherein I could relate with the character or those kind of things. So of course, kind of we can go on for like hours just on this particular topic in terms of learner engagement. But in terms of the interest of time, we'll move ahead. There's just one question, I think, Larry, which we can take at this stage. And I'll read that out for you. So it says in the chat, how does diversity play a role globally? I have omitted human images in training USA.
I mean, outside, is that outside the USA, I assume? When in any event, you know, like for instance, this company Centrio, they have a course on unconscious bias. They have a US version that is more representative of the US population. So in other words, there's a lot more images of African Americans, Latinx people, things of that nature. There's a lot more representation in terms of lifestyle photos of people from the you know, gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual communities, looking potentially more out, if you will, in terms of the imagery and things of that nature. They're, you know, they're just being who they are. Some of those images won't play necessarily in a global audience. So they, you know, they tend to do two versions of a lot of their courses. They do sort of a North American version, and then they do what they hope is a global version, which would include obviously photos that are more culturally sensitive while still representing the global population and things of this nature. So again, it's a big challenge, and you know, particularly in the learning world, it takes time for instructional designers, learning people, things of that nature, need to really take a moment and think about a strategy of how they're going to be inclusive, whether it's going to be on a national level or regional level or global level. And to your point, you know, it's not a bad strategy to omit human images for global courses, but on the other hand, as a human myself, you know, I like seeing people in action. I like being able to read their faces. I like being able to just, you know, look at their body language, even in a photograph. So, you know, that's the loss when you don't use human images, you know, when you're doing a global program.
Right. Thank you for that question to our audience. And Larry, thank you very much for taking that up. And yes, absolutely, it's a balancing act for all of us. And I think towards the end of this conversation, Larry, we will be talking a little bit about that balancing act. So now moving ahead, in terms of, we spoke about diversity, inclusivity. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about equity in learning design as well. It's not that this is something new, it has been there for a long time, but maybe due to certain circumstances or scenarios happening around us, it has taken a little bit of center stage. So Larry, first of all, if we can request you to talk us through a little bit in terms of what do we actually mean by equity in learning design, and what are some of those components which we can take care of to bring in equity in learning design?
Okay. So the whole issue of internet neutrality is obviously a big one, not just in the training world, but in the world in general. My daughter and son-in-law are teachers here in the States. A lot of their learning has moved online, and the challenge is how are they going to reach students who don't have computers at home, may not have internet connection at home, things of this nature. But they still obviously can't come to school right now to learn. So there's that whole issue of coming up with strategies that somehow try to promote internet neutrality. There's clearly not one solution, but again, to try to keep these things in mind. Secondly, and the point was raised by one of our participants about the lack of closed captions, accessibility again is a really enormous issue. There are global standards for accessibility in terms of players, in terms of instructional design, in terms of moving away from interactivities, from drag and drop, which obviously require the ability to see the screen and manipulate the screen. So there's things of that nature. And then, sociological attributes, we touched on this before. A lot of this has to do with cultural sensitivity, which particularly if you work in a global audience, it may mean that you may have to have different versions, as I indicate, for different audiences, in a live workshop session or a virtual facilitated session. You may again have to take these things in mind. And then of course, you want to balance between people that are doing something live and people that have a way to retrieve it later. So for instance, our session today is being recorded. So either people that are attending today or people that weren't able to attend or people that hear about this after the session ends, they still have a way to take advantage. So again, this is all part of the learning strategy and the technology that goes into it, Raul.
Right. Thank you, Larry. And so we just have 2 to 3 more slides before we open up for discussion. And in terms of internet neutrality, yes, that's a big question right now, not in one specific part of the world, but across the globe. We just wanted to bring this point up today that, there is some technology intervention that's possible that can, not totally do away the internet neutrality issue, but at least mitigate it to a certain level. There are organizations who provide, who can help us with offline players. And Harbinger has a product in this category. It's called the Harbinger Offline Player. What it basically does is it's a plug and play version. So when you have internet connectivity, you can download the learning material on your computer systems. Then you can go offline, you can do the learning, and then you can come back and synchronize it. And this can be customized for you. There are multiple download options, COM packaging, tracking, all those things are possible. And of course, content security, the security of the content can be ensured. So my colleague would have, pasted a link in the chat window. So please feel free to, go through it at your own convenience and at your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop us a line, drop us an email, and we'll answer questions about the offline player capability and how it can help, bridge some of this gap that internet neutrality, because of this internet neutrality, it's happening. Right. So, Larry, so now we come to the closing part before we open up for the discussion, the balancing act. So, there's a sponsor who has a certain amount of budget to get some learning created. They're the learners. Then there is this socio-economical issues happening around us. And then there's a pandemic, which has caused the remote learning. There's just so much happening. So, how does the L&D professional, the designer, balance all this?
You have to be really cognizant of your stakeholders. I think sometimes, and when I use the word educate, I don't necessarily mean persuade, but, consulting with the stakeholders, consulting with even, targeted learners to understand, our philosophy, your philosophy in terms of inclusiveness and the reasons behind it. Secondly, as I indicated, we as content creators really have to look at our own unconscious bias. There's a lot of information on the web if you don't end up taking a course about how to deal with this, but it's just critical that we deal with our own barriers before we can design appropriately and then expect other people to do it. And I said earlier, set the expectation with sponsors. It doesn't necessarily add time or budget, in my judgment, to any training product or project, but it has to be done early in the process so that you make it clear to the sponsors that here's our philosophy, here's why we do it. Hopefully you won't have any issue with it. If not, you need to obviously reach some kind of compromise. And in some instances, he that pays the piper calls the tune. So if they insist on a certain way, then obviously you have to decide if you're going to go that way, suggest other ways of going about it, things of that nature. And then as we talked about throughout this session, you're going to have different design decisions based on always having in your mind, does the screen look inclusive? Does the functionality respect different learning styles? Is there possible ways that we're offending people even unconsciously by the choices that we're making? So I think a lot of these things, again, are just, to me, it makes instructional design more interesting because, you have to be a lot more thoughtful than just, here's a bunch of slides, turn into online learning kind of stuff.
Right. Thank you, Larry. It definitely is a balancing act, and of course, as we have been talking in this session, that there's no certain guidelines or a certain playbook kind of thing which will say that you'll be 100% compliant with diversity, inclusivity, and you'll capture the essence of equity in your learning material. But it has to be a conscious effort, a beginning, a start, and we'll keep progressing as individuals, as learning communities, and as humanity in total. So Larry, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting. I'm sure the audience would have enjoyed listening into your insights. So
appreciate it.
Now we shall open up for discussion, and I would request the audience to please feel free to type in their thoughts. If you want to use the Q&A section, you can use that. Or if you want to just type in the chat, please feel free to share your thoughts, questions.
I guess while we're waiting, I have a question for you, Raul. At Harbinger, how many clients do you think are already doing this or look forward to it, versus how many clients do you feel, it might behoove to have a conversation with them about this?
Right. So I'm not sure if I'll have an exact percentage, but over a period of time, what we have seen is it's constantly increasing in terms of, the usage of characters, the diversity and all those things from design aspect. Maybe, if I go back 10 years back, it was about using different images of different skin color, but then it has constantly kept evolving, and there is a conscious effort, I think, across the board, I would say. And the interesting part is globally, because, you know, literally nowadays, all these companies, organizations have a global population. For example, if you're working with a major pharma based out of say in India, and they have US operations, they have operations in Spain, in Latin America. So even if we are coordinating with the stakeholders in this part of the world, but the learning solution is global and is getting rolled out to the global population. So the effort is to make it more diverse, inclusive, bring in the equity. So I'm not sure if I was able to answer your question clearly, but it's a progressive chart upwards.
Right. It is. Hopefully, the point you make is a really wonderful one, that, you know, hopefully this isn't just within the L&D world, that it's also within our communities and you know, at the world at large. So I appreciate your comment.